Dialogue, characters in conversation. Dialogue is an integral part of almost every story. It can also be one of the trickiest things to write. Before we go any further, I want to put to rest a lie some of you may have been told. Said is not dead. In almost every case, when you need a dialogue tag, you want said instead of something like chortled or declaimed or intoned. Primary education teachers use said is dead as a tool for teaching language variance and acquisition among younger writers. For people writing for public, said not only isn't dead, it should always be your first choice and abandoned only by necessity. Readers read some parts of a sentence, prepositions, punctuation, conjunctions, differently than they read meaning-making parts, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs of sentences. If you make the dialogue tags into meaning-making parts of sentences, you slow the reader down by expecting them to read in a way that calls attention to the act of reading itself rather than the text. But even better than dialogue tags are follow-up actions that identify the speaker. For instance, "This is bullshit. Paul slammed the door and stormed out of the room," is stronger than "This is bullshit," said Paul. He slammed the door and stormed out of the room. And remember, in a conversational back and forth, simply starting a new paragraph for each speaker can usually let you minimize the need for dialogue tags. "I'm leaving, Sigmund." Margaret stood and headed toward the airlock. "Don't go. This is just getting interesting." "I've had it with your evil plots to take over the universe." "You'll either be a henchman or a victim. Your choice, I guess." See how easy it is to track who is speaking. Also remember that speakers rarely get to prattle on for entire paragraphs without interruption. In general, it's a good rule of thumb to interrupt dialogue at least every 3 lines. Sometimes this means letting someone else speak, but it can also just be an action by the speaker. Things like Zorg twitched a tentacle at her, or Lacey swatted a fairy that flew too near her ear work just as well as another speaker. Remember too that everyone speaks differently. A gruff old hermit with a secret to hide isn't going to make the same word choices as an eager young woman who is set out to find his secret, even when they want to convey the same meaning. Characters also speak differently depending on who they are talking to. A captain tells his soldiers to be at ease, but tells his friends to relax. A diplomat speaks with great formality at court, but not at home. Be careful, though, not to go so far in trying to make your characters sound different that you make them sound cartoonish, and avoid I dialect. I dialect is an old-fashioned way of showing a character speaks with an accent. For instance, having a rural southern character say, "He done dun seed seed dat dat," instead of "he done seen that." Notice how you can keep the diction, the word choice. You want to make sure your characters are speaking real words, though. There are a few kinds of dialogue that require special consideration: internal monologue, digital dialogue, inclusion of foreign or imaginary language. Internal monologue is the term we use to describe the phenomenon of hearing a character's thoughts. Usually this happens in italics rather than in quotation marks, and it is the one exception to the interrupt dialogue regularly rule. You don't have to interrupt internal monologue every 3 or so lines. Increasingly, stories also have to account for the fact that many people now have conversations over electronic devices, using text and even emojis. They're not yet standards for how to format this, but your goal should be to make it clear and easy to read while still preserving the unique ways in which people converse over digital media. You may find you need to include foreign or even made-up words in your story. When you do, put those words in italics. It's best if the reader can get the meaning from context. If that's not possible, try to have one character define it for another. The least desirable choice is to let the authorial voice interrupt the story and define it for the reader directly. I look forward to hearing your characters speak for themselves this week.